This was new last year, and we know last year we talked about, about this being a new offering from the IU for our services. Now we're getting into some field trip stuff. I is Beaver Tourways, transportation for ninth grade class. This is a volunteering, or it's not a mandatory trip. It's a students want to go or not. Down into Philadelphia to the Seaport Museum. That would be parent paid or student paid. J is North Middle School, Lehigh Valley Iron Pigs. They go there every year since I've been here. And that again is also parent or student paid. K is something new. This is ClassLink. This is a software, as I understand, will allow us to have a single sign-on. And we're going to start this at the elementary school level. A lot of the time is taken up at the elementary level, getting through the numerous sign-ons that we have to get through to get to the kids to where they need to be. And I know this is something that we've been looking at and working on. So this is something that effective January 1st, they'd like to get started, or January 2nd when the kids come back, get started at the elementary level. And will allow a single sign-on. The kids sign on one time, boom, they're in everything they need to be in. So it's our curriculum folks, our teachers, our technology people are very excited about this, and hope it works there. If it does work there, then we're going to expand it elsewhere, to the other levels of education. So, okay. L is the Museum of American Revolution, another trip that we've been doing for the last couple of years since that opened in Philadelphia. This is the 8th grade trip at North, or the 8th grade class at North. And then M is an additional Learn Well contract. And again, this is another student that's in a medical facility, and we are responsible to educate. That's our contract for this month.
Any questions?
I happen to be scanning this last one, showing the American Revolution, the museum.
Okay.
Deposit required by 11/15. I mean, they're already run down this road. I'm just kind of curious if there's any impact there. That has a.
Oh, you mean because we won't vote on it till after?
Right. See down in the summary block.
Yeah. I do see that. I'll check on that.
I don't know if that gives us any heartburn or not.
Right, I mean, it's an every year trip, and it's paid for by the students.
I just would hate to see us be penalized missing that
By
date.
missing that date.
Yeah.
So, all right, I'll check with that, and if we have to meet that date, then we'll meet it, because I don't see any issues with it.
No, it just happened to catch my eye.
Thank you for catching it, for seeing it. So we'll check on that. We'll make sure it gets taken care of so the kids don't miss out. So.
Any other questions? No? All right. Next up is the update on the UBCTS funding formula. Dr. Yarnell.
Thank you. The two members of the board who have already seen that, Ms. Kildare and Mrs. Dolan are not here tonight, so I don't have to bore them the second time around. Maybe that's why they didn't
I don't know
come.
if they've abandoned you, Peter,
Probably.
or...
Yes, they do that all the time. So, first of all, in the sense of transparency, one would hope that this was a shot of Nakamixon. It is not. It is actually from above a fire tower in the Adirondacks. It's where we spend our summers when we can. This is the lake, Canada Lake, that we spend those summers on, and this is an actual picture in October taken by a drone, not by me. And then at the end of the presentation, you'll see the picture that I took and the difference in the quality between the two. So the Articles of Agreement are what control sort of governance of the Upper Bucks County Technical School. The school was established, actually originated in 1962, And these articles of agreement were actually agreed upon on August 7th of that year. They are, as part of the articles of agreement, there is an indication that the Joint Operating Committee should review these every 5 years. Review does not mean change. There needs to be a distinction between those two words. And below are the revisions that have been made. You can see in recent years, it has not been revised very often. And part of that is the rules of the road, so to speak, which I'll explain as we go along. I've taken specific pieces out of the funding form, or out of the Articles of Agreement that relate to the funding formula. In section 9, there is this clause that says that the operating expenses at the UBCTS will be borne by the school districts, the 3 of us who participate, proportionately, and they're done using a 5-year average of the daily membership of the pupils from each sending district. That's intended, I believe, I wasn't there when this was done originally, but I believe that's intended to even out changes in numbers. And as an example of that, this year, the number for Cambridge jumped a significant amount. So that will affect the funding that we supply. For the capital expenses, this is another section or part of that same section of the Articles of Agreement. Capital expenses are borne by the school districts proportionally to the most recent state equalization tax board numbers and the market value data. So it's a very different number, as you can imagine.
Can you go back to this again?
Yes, I can, hopefully, yeah. It's meant, yeah. Basically, the decision, the original decision, I don't believe this has been amended since that original Articles of Agreement was put together in '62, but the original decision was to run the operating expenses through basically student membership on a proportional basis and run the capital expenses through this market value.
So
As
this
you
is-
know,
This
Henry.
is how we ended up paying, what was it, like 12 million of a $26 million renovation?
Yes, we pay roughly, it changes from year to year, of course, but roughly 46–47% of that burden comes to Cambridge. And yes, our share was 11+ million of the 20, I think it was 4 million, that was used to provide the funding for the renovations that were done.
And that's basically because our real estate value is higher, is that?
Much higher.
That's really why our share is
Yes.
much, so it's based on.
Exactly. I'm sorry?
Katie's on the
Okay. Well, she's heard this, so I don't, maybe she wants to hear it again, but.
So the theory with that is it's long-term,
Yes.
so that's why it's based on a market value rather than a number of students enrolled.
Well, right, but you could have a
Student.
long term of student, what
Yes.
you've been contributing over 10 years and average that rather than the value of your properties, which has
Sure.
absolutely nothing to do with how much of the tech school you're using.
This has to do with section 4, relates to the annual operating budget. And some of the key provisions here are that the joint board, the JOC so-called, has the authority to, the joint board is all 27 members of the 3 sending districts, has the authority to acquire a site or sites. Now, only one site has been acquired, that was obviously years ago. Adopt the annual operating budget, which I put in red because that's what we're really discussing primarily, and approve the capital expenditures for building and equipment, which was, of course, what was done back when the renovation was approved. And I might note that approving that renovation took years, probably almost 2 decades to actually approve, because inevitably, one sending district wasn't prepared to fund that money.
Wasn't that partly because Palisades wanted to save the money and not have to borrow money so that they could pay for it?
I don't think that was what held it back in previous years. Palisades did pay for it in cash.
Right.
They took it out of their fund balance. Now, Palisades' share was about $4.5 million, $5 million, something, so it was a lot less than what either Quakertown or Cambridge was paying. But yes, that was part of the issue, but not necessarily the issue in terms of the long-term. There were times when Quakertown didn't feel that they could pay whatever it was that it would require, or we couldn't agree among the three of us on what renovations were supposed to be done. It can be difficult, even with three. I can't imagine what goes on in places like the LCTI up in the Lehigh Valley where they have 17 school districts involved. It must be a fun meeting. In terms of the joint board, the approval, and this is pretty key, the approval of the operating budget requires the affirmative vote of two things. First of all, a majority of all the school districts, there are 27 of us normally, so it requires at least 14 affirmative votes, and a majority of all, of each of two school districts, that would be 5 votes from each of 2 school districts, and then a majority of the total school districts, which is 14. So there are 2 components to this. And generally speaking, that has not been an issue, but it does require both of those to be approved. If someone is absent or abstains, that counts as a no vote for, effective, because it's only a matter of majorities of the two parts here.
So, if you're saying 14, and there's not, so
27 of us all
you
vote.
could have one whole board of 9 vote,
And you have to have another board of 5.
and then another board of 5 vote,
Right,
and then
and
you
one
could
board
have
can-
one entire
In
board
this
say
case,
no.
one board could completely either say no or abstain or not be there, and the budget would still pass. And I can't recall that ever has happened in the last 20 years, but there have been times when a board has certainly not been majority approval. Only 2 of the districts approved by majority. Let's see. Amendment and termination. This is section 21, and it requires, again, an affirmative vote of a majority of all the school directors of each school district in order to either terminate, which I think is unlikely, but amend is the key here, because the amendment is what we're talking about in terms of if we want to change that funding formula, or either of those funding formulas. All right, there is a gentleman's agreement that was a consequence of Act 1, our famous 2006 limitation on property tax increases for school districts and the index value that's published therefrom. That was that none of the school districts wanted to absorb the numbers greater than the Act 1 index in any given year. And this was particularly true during the recession years of 2009, 2010, 2011. So this came into play and is still part of what is considered each year. It had some serious unintended consequences, which we are now facing. And as I say, it was established to limit the value, or limit the increase of the individual school districts as well as overall. Okay, the unintended consequence. Generally, one school district of the 3 sees an Act 1 index increase. This coming year, for instance, it would be 2.3%. And the recipient of that 2.3% may well be Pennridge. As I see the early numbers, that's still to be determined. But this past 2, 3, 4 years has been Quakertown, because they chose to send 9th graders to the vocational school, I think maybe 4 years ago, some time ago, and that obviously bumped up their numbers and created just that effect. And then the second part of this is that the other 2 school districts typically see decreases in funding, and we saw that this past year. A big decrease, actually, $228,000 or something in that order, don't quote the number. But it was a big decrease, and that was because of this gentleman's agreement and the overall percentage increase. And I'm going to show numbers later to really bore all of you, but the percentage of the revenue from the 3 sending districts overall has declined. This is a part that is very worrisome to me. Years ago, before this came to play, the school districts funded roughly 85% of the revenue at the vocational technical school. Now we're funding closer to 70 to 75%. The problem is making up that difference, right? Because there aren't a lot of other serious revenue streams that accrue to the vocational school. At least not to the general fund. And what we're really talking about here is the general fund. I mean, they, like here, have a cafeteria fund, they have a production fund, and capital projects and various things that this doesn't apply to. But we're really talking about the general fund, which far and away is the bulk of what's expended in the revenue that you're looking for at the school. Okay, to the numbers. Starting in 2007, this slide summarizes the budgets, the increases, the contributions from the schools, the contribution increases from the schools, the Act 1 index, the fund balance that was budgeted to be used, and the fund balance overall. And, you know, there are some trends here. First of all, what happened, because this is when the Act 1 Gentleman's Agreement came into effect, you can see in 2007 and 2008, school districts actually overall contributed less money to the VOTEC than they had in the previous year in 2006. And then later it increased somewhat. At this point, the Act 1 index was quite high, so the overall contributions were still fairly robust relative to the increases in the budget at the vocational school. You can also see, for many years, the VOTEC didn't have the mechanism to have a fund balance. That was changed back, I think it was the revision in 2001, it was put into the Articles of Agreement that that could happen. And there was a fairly large fund balance built up. I will tell you that a lot of that money came from the sale of the airport property at the Quakertown Airport. There was an aeronautics program that was very successful technically and very unsuccessful financially that operated out of that airport for many years, and eventually the JOC decided to close it. There was property involved as well as just the program itself, and the sale of the property resulted, I think it was a $1.7 million contribution toward the fund balance. So most of what you see there in the bottom line came from that sale of property. These are the next 4 years. Same variables and same information. You can see the budget is growing. The budget increase depends on the years. In 2014 it was small. In 2011 it was 3.5%, higher than the Act 1 index. In recent years there's been an effort to keep it under the Act 1 index. Again, you can see that the school districts were contributing a little more money, but not much more money. And so that differential between the budget and the school contribution continues to grow. I don't have the percentages there, but if you looked at that, that would be the 85% slowly nudging down toward the 70-75% number that I mentioned. The fund balance has grown through this period and is now, as of 2014, about $3.5 million. This is the most recent period, obviously from 2015 through to the 2019. And by the way, when I say 2015, it's the school year that ends in June 30th of 2015. I've just shorthanded it, which is also what the UBCTS finance person does, so I'm accustomed to that, and I apologize, I should have explained that up front. What you can see from this slide is that the school contribution increase is not an increase, it's a continuing decrease, and this past year it's 4.16 that decrease is headed for. Obviously, at the time these slides were put together, they didn't have the audited fund balance, that's why I put the 3.367 number down there as an estimated number. Clearly the 2019 hasn't come to pass yet, so we don't know what the fund balance will be at the end of the year. What you can also see here is the budgeted fund balance numbers are growing dramatically year on year. And it's a roughly $9 million fund, or $9 million budget, of which $1.5 million, more or less, is being budgeted as fund balance. That's a hefty percentage, as we all know, right? That's about 16-17%. So.
But it seems to, but overall, it doesn't seem to be taking away from the fund balance, well, a little bit.
Now it
The
is,
fund balance
right?
is
For
pretty much
years
stayed
it
the same.
didn't, but now we've begun to bite into it. And what that means is that the revenues have not kept up with the expenditures at the VOTEC the last 2 years, and probably won't this year either. Hasn't been a big number, but that's my concern, Megan, exactly. That is going to continue to grow because the system isn't set up to do anything else. You know, it's a mathematical difficulty without reducing the budget. And the budget, as you can see, has grown, but not dramatically over the years recently. But unless you reduce the budget, you're gonna continue to do that.
Peter, as I recall, that growth in the budget is primarily salaries and healthcare.
It's actually primarily healthcare. The
I
healthcare
remember
number
the
itself
healthcare
was
was-
$200,000 this last year. If you look there, the growth was $247,000. So almost all of it is in healthcare. The vocational school, of course, has a very limited number of employees, I believe 50-some total, so it's not a very large group. They entered the consortium that the IU did, and they have fared well in the consortium, frankly. The increases, they get increases year on year of as much as 28% increase, so it was really tough to swallow. They have now moved to, maybe Sean, you can help me, Del Val, I don't know what the name of the organization, but a different consortium, which is saving them some money, no doubt about it, but it's still a
Yeah,
tough
I
issue.
remember the preliminary
Yeah, no.
look at that, it was huge.
That's absolutely a big part of this. And salaries have grown too, but not to anywhere near what the healthcare rate was.
He also had a declining geezer's costs and that.
And that's also in there, yes, so yeah, actually they have cut some of the other costs, right?
Yeah, just to make up for those.
For instance, one of the things that happened, the custodial work at the vocational school in the last contract was outsourced. And that saved a sizable amount of money, even though it was only 4.5 people, but it saved some real money. But, you know, there's a limited amount of things like that that you can change. And some of them are contractual. Okay, funding formula proposal. There has been the proposal that capped at Act 1 with no decreases. That actually was done 1 year. What that did was, or what that would do, was add to the one school that it has the largest increase in ADMs, basically. That was Quakertown. And this shows what the effect of that would be. There would be no change in the contribution from Palisades, no change in the contribution from Penn Ridge, but a 71,000 additional contribution from Quakertown. Capped with the Act 1 gentleman's agreement is the left-hand column, and that's what actually happened. And you can see that the amount of the increase was actually a decrease. The red numbers in the negative are decreases. The Penridge number contribution decreased 238, almost 239,000. Now, to put that in perspective, we had almost the exact same number of students this year as we had last year. So, on the ADM average, I mean, not specifically. Next year, that number of students will is increasing, so that'll change that formula somewhat. But that's what actually happened. The Quakertown increase was 2.4% because that's what the Act 1 increase was, and that resulted in this $1.489 million budgeted fund balance usage.
Didn't we have the floor in there so that we didn't actually get that decrease, or was that the year prior?
That was a prior.
That was a prior year. Without the cap, this is what would have to happen to fully fund the districts to fully fund. And as you can see, the fact that it would require an $820,000 increase from Quakertown, 27.7%. That won't happen because all 3 school districts have veto power effectively. It's a little bit like the Security Council at the UN. The districts have veto power and no one is going to accept that kind of increase in a single year.
What do you mean by the, because I thought you said that 14 people could approve the budget, right? And if it was a gentleman's agreement, did anyone have?
The budget, but the funding formula is not, that requires the 3 sending districts to approve the funding.
Right, but the 3 sending districts never voted on it, did they? Because it was a gentleman's agreement. So isn't the funding
voted.
formula still what it was originally?
The funding formula is what it was originally, right? The budget is voted on by the JOC first and then presented to all 27 members and they vote on whatever the budget is that's recommended to them. If they don't approve it, then it goes back and the JOC and the administration of the VOTEC have to revise it.
So they voted the budget for 2 years ago without all, when our board voted it down.
Yes.
Essentially, the same thing could happen to any board.
Yes.
2 districts could vote it through, and you wouldn't really, you would already be, if you passed the without cap, you would still be in compliance with the funding formula, because the funding formula was never changed. The gentleman's agreement didn't
Nope.
change it, because no one
You're right.
voted on it.
I can bet you, and will bet you, that Penridge will not approve a $315,000 increase.
Increase, like it does.
Well, if
And
that's
Quakertown
what it
certainly won't
costs.
approve the $820,000, so, you know, there are your two districts out the window before you start.
Well, unless Penridge did approve it.
And frankly, Palisades may not have approved the 92,000. I mean, everybody gets hurt in a way. You can see, it's a 10.9% increase for Palisades, a 12.7% increase for Cambridge, and a 27.7% increase for Quakertown. I use this as an example. I don't think any of the JOC members would agree to this. I can be wrong, but that's my assumption.
So your numbers are fairly close there, Peter, or they're right on. So the 1.1 in fund balance budget, what's left in the fund balance up there? Because I know we were concerned.
3.367 was was at the end of June,
Okay.
without unaudited, and it wasn't the final number, but it should be close to that according to Mrs. Capuano, the business manager.
Okay. Sorry.
Yes. There still is a healthy fund balance there, but it's going to decrease unless we do something.
Excuse me, are those hypothetical numbers or are those
What?
on the previous slide?
Those are real numbers. I mean, the
From
real
last
numbers are
year?
at the left. That's what actually happened last year. The other two are not actual numbers in the sense that they were never passed, but they are what the numbers would be with those constraints. So I don't call those hypothetical, but I suppose you could.
So the middle column is what happened the year before, basically.
Basically, yes, but it would have been different numbers, but it's
Right.
basically the same
Strategy.
concept. Yes.
I don't want to insert myself too much, but I need to understand those numbers.
Okay. The comparisons. Here's what the situation is. The current formula and the current enrollments are at the top, right, in the top line. So those enrollments, and these are ADM averages. Please remember that. So these are 5-year
That's
rolling
5 years.
averages. They're not this year, they're the past 5 years. Sorry. So Palisades obviously has the lowest enrollment, has for many years, it's 88. Their percentage that they pay under the current formula this past year was 12.87% of it. We paid 38.89. We had an average of 266 students. Quakertown has had an average of 330 students, so they're paying almost half, 48.25. There was a proposal to go to eligible enrollment. What eligible enrollment means is you base this on the total number of students at each of the 3 sending schools' high schools. So if Penridge has, as we did this year, 2355 as our enrollment at the high school, Palisades has 603 and Quakertown 1665. Then you divide that up. That would result in quotas where Palisades would pay for 89 students, Penridge for 348, and Quakertown for 246. That would shift this whole thing dramatically, obviously, toward the Penridge numbers, toward being more than half of the total cost. This is not who goes to the VOTEC. This is who's eligible